Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, preseason game number 2. Chargers versus the Rams officially now in the books. Lots of takeaways that we need to go through. Once again, spoiler alert, if you were coming to this game looking for offense, I guess you could say it looked better than week 1, but that's not really the most endearing statement that we could make as it relates to just the surface levels of the things we're going to get into. But plenty of standouts, better moments for the offense overall as a whole, and lots to get into as we gear up for the final week of the preseason. Dan, I'm excited to break this one down with you.
Me too. This is going to be a fun one. And again, when we go through these breakdowns, I think what's important for us is when we see little flashes in the pans, you recognize them. But when they become themes, that's when it becomes a bigger story, in my opinion. And we saw some of that come to light in this game. A lot more takeaways and positives, in my opinion, on the offensive side this week. Now, some consistent themes of some negatives, mainly at the quarterback position, which we'll get to later on. But Jake, this one got me excited for lots of reasons. The offense, you started to see some flashes from guys that really, I think, need it. You know, Quinton Johnson, I thought, had a pretty good day. Kimani Vidal had a pretty good day. We'll get to these names later. Joe Alt looks as advertised. Good Lord, is that man strong. And then on defense, we'll get to some of the guys there too. But Deane, Leonard, Tarheeb still, Taree Tartt. We saw the linebackers ball out still. Tarheeb still. There's a bunch of guys on defense and themes we're seeing on that side as well. And then, of course, Dicker, the kicker, just cool like the other side of the pillow.
Other side of the pillow.
So, yeah, exciting times for Chargers fans. And again, what is exciting to me is the connectiveness we're starting to see. The running game started to take shape. We saw blocking look much better this week. And then on the defensive side, you're starting to see interior pressure, and you're seeing the cornerback / secondary work together on a string. And we'll talk about this later, Jake. What I think is kind of my first takeaway from the defensive side, just as overarching before we get to the standouts and stuff, is this idea of like the exception versus the rule. And you look at the trends that we've seen over this last couple of years, right? We're so accustomed to seeing the rule being this Chargers secondary is getting gashed, right? Over and over again. And when you see a good play by the secondary, you're like, oh, well, that's what it looks like. It feels like that flips, where when you see one busted coverage or one misstep by the secondary, you're like, oh, forgot that happens. Otherwise, this Chargers secondary looks pretty good. And you're not seeing many lapses in coverage or judgment or communication or assignment. And that's got me excited because that's been kind of one of the Achilles heels for this Chargers defense. And then, I mean, we just got done with the Olympics. You're talking swim lanes. You're talking running lanes on the track. These running lanes that these Chargers running backs are getting now, I mean, you and I can walk through it just chilling. But we'll get to all of that. Jake, before we do that, we got to pay the bills.
Obviously got to pay the bills.
I want
to remind everybody that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and the number one source on everything as it relates to sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet for up to $250 on your first deposit on anything from the UFC to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are currently being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or on one with one of our 150 slot games that we have available. Head on over to the website today in order to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit for up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here.
So, Jake, put your Jim Harbaugh hat on for a second. We heard him at the podium, but let's say you're Jim Harbaugh. What were your kind of main takeaways? Let's say you're at the podium now, Jake. What were your main takeaways before we get to the individual stars of week 2 preseason game versus the Rams?
If it was me at the podium, I would echo the comments of what Jim Harbaugh had said in terms of the offense looking better than it did a week ago. And when we heard Jim Harbaugh's comments after week one, he was less than enthusiastic on how that offensive output was. Below average, I believe, is the term that he specifically used after the week one preseason game. And he had sent a message to the quarterbacks in terms of what needed to get done in preparation for week two against the Rams. You heard plenty of comments from him talking about, let's treat every single play that we're going to do as if it's third down. Let's get the ball moving. Let's get some rhythm in with these quarterbacks that aren't named Justin Herbert. And I think progressively through the week, you saw that, because whether it was Easton Stick still having his, let's just say Easton Stick had a better game, not by much, however you want to gauge it. I thought it was impressive when he started moving the ball in the ways that he should be able to move the ball. Just still too much inconsistency from Easton Stick. And Dan, we've seen plenty of flashes of Easton Stick looking good during training camp practices, but when you're now seeing it at actual live game situation, it's hard to sit back and scratch your head, because the few moments that came that were positive for Easton Stick were when he actually took some chances, pushed the ball downfield, and got some good passes, but that was late in the first half. This was already after you had a fumble at the 1 yard line and a bad tip for an interception for a ball that was thrown behind his wide receiver that ended up getting turned over. Also, good moments for Easton Stick is when he's able to run that run pass option. I think he does it as good as anybody, because that was his bread and butter when he was coming out of college. And I think that that's one of those biggest reasons that you feel like this offense for Greg Roman should be one that he should be able to operate with good poise, good confidence, have this offense in a rhythm. And at times I felt like he did that, but at other times it felt like it was the same mistakes that we were seeing from a week ago. So it's unfortunate that he was able to lead a 13-play, 50-minute drive that took a chunk of time off that clock. And then you had the fumble at the 1 yard line that kept the Chargers still out of the end zone. We're still looking for that first touchdown of the preseason for this unit. So offensively, if you're related to Easton Stick, I'd still say there's much left to be desired.
You're being so kind on this right now.
I mean, I am, because it's still the preseason. But then you go to QB2, and there were only two quarterbacks that ended up taking snaps in this game. Max Duggan, who we just found out this morning, is no longer with the Chargers. And it was a different quarterback that, again, Dan, first pass of the game, you see the confidence from Luis Perez as he's up there. First throw, first down, very confident in pushing the ball downfield. And I think that there's a little bit of a dichotomy between what works for Easton Stick and what works for Luis Perez, but still to have someone who literally joined the roster not even 2 weeks ago, as far as full days. And even when you heard the commentary as far as what Greg Roman is trying to get him ramped up into this offense in terms of his play, his skill set, what works for him, it still was a nice build off of what we saw from week one. Not the best. I still think that both of these guys are still in, if you were to ask me today, I still think that they would favor Easton Stick based off of 6 years of experience and his familiarity with these team members as they would. You're going to tell me that 2 games thus far off of the output is going to dethrone that? I'm not saying that either looked good or that either has a commanding lead over the other. I'm simply saying I'd still think that you would still go with Easton Stick. If you ask me, if I was at the podium, I still think that that's what the coaches are going to end up doing. Not saying that that's going to end up being the right decision, but it could very well happen. Now, to your point, Dan, I know what your argument's going to be, because you're going to say 6 years of Easton Stick being on this roster should yield far better results than even in a preseason game than what we have seen through these first 2 weeks.
Five of those without Jim Harbaugh. So he can care less about the other 5.
I'm totally with you. And I think that this offense is one that he should probably have the best results in, honestly. Even if we're talking about a unit that doesn't have big name wide receivers, you're still essentially building chemistry, building rapport with your 2s and your 3s. I get all of that. But just in general, for a player that's been in the league the duration of Easton Stick for a backup quarterback, you think that the overall performance would be better than Luis Perez, much smaller sample size in a much shorter period of time. So I will still say from a coaching perspective that you'd probably still go into week 3 starting Easton Stick.
Which he did. Jim
Right.
Harbaugh alluded to that.
Yes. So you probably once again have Easton Stick take the first half of preseason game number 3. Luis Perez finish out the second half of preseason week number 3. And that's probably what you'll go into for the season. Now,
see, that's too far.
Well, hang on. Does either of these quarterbacks negate the need for another veteran backup quarterback on this roster? No. And that's my point. The needle did not move far enough to say, okay, the Chargers are fine at a backup quarterback spot. You obviously never want to see Justin Herbert going down.
I am not used to Jake being this like sugarcoating on a Monday. This is totally not.
How am I sugarcoating? I just said
you have been the so
priority.
Okay. let's be blunt here for a second. Let's be blunt.
How did I sugarcoat it?
Easton Stick and Luis Perez are not the QB2 on the team. They should be battling for QB3 at best. They both were not good.
Just said, does either one of their performances negate the need for another veteran quarterback to come in on this team? Absolutely not.
I mean, look. There's a lot of good things from this game, so we'll try to wrap up kind of the quarterback stuff with this. Like a 6-year veteran quarterback should not be fumbling the snap at the 1-yard line. And again, with the backdrop of knowing how big this game was, we were all talking about how big this was for Easton Stick, and he had to deliver because there's a lot riding on this second game. And again, there were some good moments, I guess, but if you want to talk about it in totality, 8 for 13 for 85 yards.
Yeah.
In a half of football with 2 turnovers, and both turnovers were awful. And the one was a fumbled snap. He owned that one. And then on the interception, a 6-year veteran quarterback should not, A, need to reset his feet to throw it 5 yards, and B, not be able to reset his feet and throw it accurately 5 yards.
Especially when Simi Foko was in the middle of the field and not one single defender was within 5 yards of him.
He stopped.
Like, didn't have to throw this ball into traffic, and you threw it behind him. Yes. So again, you can call it sugarcoating all you want, Dan. I mean, I'm simply saying
they can't. No, but what I mean the sugarcoating part was they can't go into the season as is.
Right. There was nothing that was done on Saturday that dispelled any need for another veteran quarterback to come in here.
And furthermore, there were positives that were done and on display in week 2 that further emphasized kind of the magnifying glass and the heat from it on the quarterback specifically.
Correct.
Week 1, we could talk about the running backs weren't following lanes. We could talk about the pass blocking or run blocking wasn't good. We could talk about week 2, pass catchers were doing their thing. You saw pass catchers blocking and receiving. You saw running backs and offensive linemen blocking and rushing. You saw clean pockets and Easton Stick just leaving for whatever reason. You saw untimely throws, mistimed, inaccurate. And you just saw, and again, you mentioned the kind of tale of two sides. In my opinion, and I'm just going to call a spade. Luis Perez seems like the more capable quarterback than Easton Stick. And so if I'm Jim Harbaugh and it was up to me right now, I'm taking Luis Perez. Now, does he bring experience? I don't know. In NFL, no. Maybe relationship with Justin Herbert? No. Who cares? Do you care about the relationship with Justin Herbert when you're trying to win a football game when Justin Herbert's injured? That's what we're talking about here. So in the context of, we're talking about QB2 here. And can they right the ship, hold it together for a week or two? And right now, I sure as hell don't trust Easton Stick to do that. And I don't think I trust Luis Perez to do that. But again, it's been less than 2 weeks he's been on the roster. They gotta do the responsible thing and bring in a QB2, an actual QB2. I'd take Stetson Bennett over both of them, and he's not even that great. He just looks like a capable NFL quarterback. So I know we went along on the quarterback thing, but like, let's just be clear here. Both of Jake and I are in agreement. I believe. I don't put words in your mouth.
You're on
the
right
quarterback
track.
Two is not on the roster right now.
No. And if we're going off of the praise that we are giving to Joe Ortiz in terms of, constantly churning the bottom of the roster, it wouldn't shock me if this was the last opportunity that you gave to see overall what took place. And, we just talked about Max Duggan being released. And so as of right now, you have 3 quarterbacks that are remaining on the roster. You had 5 at one point. One of them didn't even play a week 1. A week later passes, Max Duggan didn't even get a single snap in the second preseason game. It is now Monday. He is now no longer on the roster. I still think you look at that position with some curiosity. Who is possibly going to become available from other teams that you'd be interested in possibly picking up? There are still the veteran options that are out there that people have thrown around in terms of those names goes. So, yes, Dan and I are in full agreement that as it relates to the quarterback too, you need some more capable backups to Justin Herbert. Obviously, we would never want to see any of them play because we would love to see Justin Herbert 100% healthy. But as it relates to the battle right now between Easton Stick and Luis Perez, there's good and there's bad takeaways from both that you could say it's probably much more of an even horse race, in my opinion, right now, as it stands, to have a guy who literally just got on the team 2 weeks ago, which is staggering. You would never think that you would get a type of comparison like that for someone who's been with this roster like Easton Stick has. But this is where we're at. So the needle did not move that much overall from the quarterback play between week 1 and week 2. So it'll be interesting to see what Joe Ortiz looks at this roster and ultimately decides to do by the time that we get to the end of this week.
So I think the big takeaways, we talk about the connectiveness. Jim Harbaugh alluded to this in the press conference afterwards, and I thought this was really interesting. We've all heard the attention to detail, the importance of that. And you see that on display throughout the game. Mostly positive, but also in some negatives. And Jake, we've talked about Jesse Minter and how incredible of an adjustments guy he is from first half to second half. And things that they do to help these players succeed, get in positions to go out there and make plays. And I don't know if you caught this, but Jim Harbaugh, after the game, alluded to the coaching staff went out there and made adjustments. They got these guys in positions to succeed, but these players were not paying attention or were not alert. And there were 2 plays, I think it was 2 out of the first 3 plays that the Chargers defense was out there on the second half, that there were specific players that were not focused and missed opportunities. There was one from a linebacker perspective where he was not in right position to make a tackle. I think they went for like a 9-yard rush. And then there was a naked bootleg where cornerback crashed in, didn't take the right line, and then left the quarterback wide open to throw it to an open tight end, I think, for a 15-yard play. That's the kind of specifics and attention to detail that this Chargers team is getting, where it's like, this isn't good enough. Even when most of it's pretty solid. So, Jake, for you, what would you like to start with? Offensive standouts or defensive standouts? Because they were good on both sides, honestly.
I feel like, ever since Justin Herbert has taken his time away from being in a walking boot to treat his plantar fascia injury, it feels like
which he's not in anymore. Hallelujah.
Right. Yes. Thank the gods. But it seems like defense has just been winning a majority of the days, whether it's practice or when you actually watch these first 2 preseason games. So let's start with the offensive output, because I feel a lot better in terms of what we were talking about, or the lack thereof, in terms of offensive output last week. So let's go ahead and start with that today. Let's go ahead and start with Kimani Vidal.
Have a day.
This was one of the best things to see, because Kimani Vidal, who was suited up for last week's preseason game, pregame warmups, and then goes back to the locker room, comes back in street clothes, doesn't end up playing at all. We had talked about it last week, how Daniel Popper had put his early 53-man projection as far as the rosters goes, and had Kimani Vidal actually missing out as one of the running backs for this unit, because at that point in time, still coming back from an injury, hadn't been really going through much of practice anyway. So again, for full context of what Daniel Popper was saying, he said that a lot could change in 2 weeks. I still haven't seen him. I'm just basing this off of what I've seen. Kimani Vidal arrives at week 2 of the preseason and says, "Hold my beer," and single-handedly has just as many rushing yards as the Chargers had last week, split between 3 running backs, between Jaret Patterson, Elijah Dotson, and Isaiah Spiller. The aspects of what Kimani Vidal showcased on Saturday was exactly what you saw from him in college. Great patience, great burst through the hole, terrific vision when eluding tacklers, and he just has that. He showcased some of that explosiveness that I would love to see out of this running back group. If you were to come in and tell me tomorrow that your 3 running backs, as far as the starting rotation goes, would be between J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, and Kimani Vidal, I think that would be a terrific combination of guys with different type of skill sets, whether it's short yardage situation, middle of the field, depending on what the down and distance is that you need. And I think that this is exactly what Greg Roman wants to see, because as he has talked about in previous press conferences, not only are they going to run it down the defense's throat, but he's going to hit them with a different flavor every single time that he does that. And just in general, Dan, I actually thought that the rotation of running backs that they utilized throughout this game, just from an offensive standpoint, it's not like they used Kimani Vidal for an elongated period of time for every series, maybe with the exception of one, but they had a nice rotation of getting Spiller reps, Dotson reps, Patterson reps throughout the entirety of the game. And I thought that they showcased a good preview of what the rotation is going to be like, not necessarily with personnel, but how they're planning on going to be using that type of rotation with running backs during the season. So I think you could pretty much put to bed the worries of Kimani Vidal not making this 53-man roster after that performance on Saturday.
Kimani Vidal, 11 carries, 49 yards, 4.5 yards per carry. Jaret Patterson, 4 carries, 10 yards. Elijah Dotson, 4 carries, 8 yards. Isaiah Spiller, 2 carries, 7 yards. So all the other running backs had below a 3.5 or below average. And Kimani Vidal had more than double, almost triple, any other running back in terms of carries. 11 versus 4, 4, and 2, respectively. Kimani Vidal looked good. And you started to see types of running that you just haven't seen from the Chargers running backs in a long time. He has that deceptive kind of shiftiness and kind of slithers behind his blocks, which was really refreshing. And that's a testament to him and the blocking in front of him. There were some mauling plays by Trey Pipkins, Joe Alt, which we'll talk about here in a second, Rashawn Slater going downhill, Zion Johnson doing his thing. Like the running game looks good. There was a back-to-back sequence. I think it was 3 plays in a row. Kimani Vidal had 3 rushes for something like 20 yards-ish, and a first down. 2 first downs, technically. Kimani Vidal looked good. There's no way he doesn't make this roster. Again, I think it's Patterson, Vidal, Dobbins, and Edwards. Those are your 4. And again, fair or unfair to Spiller, at this point, he's had an opportunity. And he's had a couple plays. He had a catch on a Texas route, I think it was this past week. Again, I like Isaiah Spiller, but I don't know how you can keep him or Elijah Dotson over those other 2 guys that we talked about. We talk about the crazy part about this, Jake, with what we're seeing. And again, like Jim Harbaugh alluded to this, he says, I'm paraphrasing, but you guys see it. Whoever the best players that are playing are going to be on the team. Who plays the best is going to stay. Who doesn't. Simi Foko is making this really hard on the other receivers. And again, fair or unfair as it is because of the quarterback play. That's one of the reasons why they got to figure something out, because these other guys aren't really getting a fair shake. But given what we've seen, I don't know how you can tell me Simi Foko is not on the 53-man roster. Do I think he will be? There's some nuance there, and I'm going to say no, but not because of his play, but because of I just don't think Brendan Rice clears waivers, but I do think Simi Foko can. And I know people are like, oh, he's good. Every year you see guys who are balling out at training camp, who the Chargers fans adore, Michael Bandy, and then they're crossing their fingers. They're like, oh, we're so screwed. We're so stupid. And then they clear waivers on the practice squad. I think Simi Foko does the same thing. I don't think Brendan Rice does. But Simi Foko looks good on special teams, making tackles. Like, he had 2 tackles. He had great catches. He had that great catch on a throw from Easton Stick, and then the next one, Easton Stick throws the interception. Simi Foko looks good. He looks dependable, right? He's got hands. And it makes the who is wide receiver 6 currently kind of a, 1 week to go. I think it's between Brendan Rice. Quinton Johnson had a couple opportunities. He dropped one, which that actually looked like it may have been a catch. He bobbled it, came back and got it, but I think they called him out of bounds beforehand.
It was close, but I think he was out of bounds before he ended up having full possession.
Gotcha. Brendan Rice didn't really get any opportunity in that one, honestly. There was one other, I think, pass attempt to Cornelius Johnson in the back of the end zone and almost got him crazy hurt because he ran right into the goalpost on that throw that was high by, I think it was Easton Stick. Simi Foko had a day. So if we're talking about week 2 offensive standouts, definitely Simi Foko. Jake, Joe freaking Alt, man. There's always I think what's important for offensive linemen is if you don't hear their name. Especially if you hear their name when they're mauling, sure. Joe Alt looked pretty good. And I know there's going to be a constant discourse of what the Chargers could have done at 5. This is the identity of this Chargers team. They went with Joe Alt, and Joe Alt looks as advertised. And I don't want to put the comparison to Rashawn Slater his rookie year in terms of just how quickly and seamlessly he transitioned. But guys that size don't do the things that he does. That's just insane. His leverage, his anchor, his strength, his mobility when he goes downhill, and his pass protection on the right side is really good. There's a stat, I think it was PFF put out a stat today, Jake. What was it? He had, how many snaps did he have? Joe Alt versus Rams, according to PFF, 15 pass blocking snaps, 0 pressures, and an 80.7 pass blocking grade is your rookie right tackle. So, look good. And the offensive line in general, like I said, looked pretty connected.
It did. I thought it fared better than what you saw some of the number of pressures that came from week 1, which again is indicative, good for the offensive line, not so good from the quarterback play in terms of you had better pass protection, better in the run game overall, as you mentioned, Dan. So the connectivity between the starting offensive line minus Bradley Bozeman is starting to come along, which is good to see. And especially as you mentioned from Joe Alt, you go back and you watch some of his reps from week 1 to week 2, it looks like same story, different week. Even when it looks like a rep that he's losing, he's able to plant his feet in the ground and just absolutely recover and stonewall and prevent that edge rusher from getting any closer to the quarterback. These are the building blocks that you see from Joe Alt. Dan, I loved the Kay Adams interview with Joe Alt just prior to the preseason game when just talking.
Complaining about rent prices.
Well, but not only to know what he's learning from Rashawn Slater, but to have Khalil Mack now telling him, hey, these are some things that you could be improving when I'm coming at you or when someone else is coming at you. And he said he's never had that type of evaluation before from a defensive player to correct some of the issues that he's doing. So not only are you getting mentorship from the offensive side of the ball with your bookend tackle and Rashawn Slater, now you're getting it from a seasoned veteran on the defensive side of the ball. This is only going to be great things for Joe Alt moving forward. And you got to love what you've seen even in 2 preseason games. This is exactly why the Chargers selected Joe Alt at 5, whether you agree or disagree. This is why you did it. And you got to protect the investment, because if we're criticizing for as much as we've seen from the backup quarterbacks over these first 2 preseason games, there's a reason why you don't want to see Justin Herbert come off the field. So you get him protection. You do what you have to do to keep him upright.
Yep. Joe Alt, 80.7 pass blocking grade. Rashawn Slater, 80.8 pass blocking grade. Those are your 2 tackles. You'll take that pretty good. Run blocking grade. Rashawn Slater, 82.5. Joe Alt, 73.6. Again, all these numbers are in green. Will Dissly blocking well. Trey Pipkins in green on both run blocking and pass blocking. He had a 67.6 run block, 79 pass blocking grade, according to PFF. A whole lot of greens in pass blocking, and the run blocking looked pretty good too. Don't look now. And again, I want to caution / temper this a little bit. But damn it, it is hard not to get a little excited and to see the clear improvements, even in a non-catch, from Quinton Johnson. And if you look at the stat sheet alone, right, what is it, 1 catch?
Stat sheet ain't going to tell you the full story.
But it wasn't just a 1 for 19 day for Quinton Johnston.
Mind you, Dan is literally going to talk about Quinton Johnston in a more positive light right now with a combination of 3 different plays, and only one of them was a caught ball. So let's see what Dan Wolkenstein goes here.
But that's what I'm saying is, like, it's weird that I can do this. And again, like, is this 3 catches for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns? No. But it showcases the opportunity that he has and the improvements that he's shown. That catch that he wasn't able to get his second foot in bounds in was impressive. You do not see Quinton Johnson catching that last year, period. Now, great defensive play by the cornerback to push him out of bounds before he gets the second foot. And again, it was close. But Quinton Johnson skied for that, used his hands, was able to adjust after the catch, tried turning around to get both feet in, gets 1 foot, almost gets the second foot in a ball that probably shouldn't have been that high to begin with. And then the other part that may have been equally as impressive and shows that he is working in the lab with Sanjay Law, and he alluded to that as much, was the double move that he put on and breaks free, has a wide open touchdown. The cornerback ends up grabbing him, and the quarterback can't get the throw out there, and it's like 5 yards too far, and it's out in front of Quinton Johnston. But what I thought was interesting is so many times last year, it seemed like anybody with eyes can see the tell when Quinton Johnston's going to stop, going to end his route, come back in, whatever it is. And he kind of lifts his head up or puts his head down, whatever, he has a look. He goes and does that yesterday or on Saturday and sucks in the cornerback and just takes off. You have not seen that from Quinton Johnston. And so there's some nuances that we're starting to see. You're like, oh, this is the stuff that we should be able to see. So again, like I don't want to give too much praise to Quinton Johnson, but each of those 3 things, along with the 1 catch for 19 yards on that first play in the second half from Luis Perez, are plays that Quinton Johnson is showing improvement. And so, again, in context, on the stat sheet, 1 catch, 19 yards. But those other 2 plays, you got a first down, drawn illegal contact on the defense, and then the hands catch was impressive. So, I don't know. Call me optimist, but that was like, dang, good for you, Q.
And Dan says I'm sugarcoating the quarterback conversation. No, you have to start somewhere, obviously. And with Quinton Johnston, you go all the way back to last year and what Sanjay Law has talked about. It's about building his confidence back. It's about getting him to build those traits that they want for him to be utilized in this offense properly. And yes, in a very small sample size, if you go back and you look at the issues that Quinton Johnson had last year, getting separation and catching the ball. And yes, in 3 targets, he essentially was able to display
all 3
a little bit of that. But yes, I actually thought that the most impressive was the separation, because that was on a 3rd and 19 play that Easton Stick threw that ball down there. And if he was able to come down with that, that goes to the house. That goes to the house.
Yep.
So he got half of it. because he wasn't able to obviously earn an opportunity to catch that ball. But in terms of getting separation, that's definitely something that you did not see Quinton Johnson doing last year, especially in that type of a one-on-one matchup, running that specific type of a route. So it's still early days, and essentially, I think that we've kind of figured out what this depth chart is going to look like come week one, where you're having Joshua Palmer, Ladd McConkey, and DJ Chark be your wide receiver 1, 2, 3. Quinton Johnson will probably start the season as wide receiver 4 as it currently stands right now when you see where he's starting to come into the game and getting some of these reps. But it's, as we've heard plenty of times from this coaching staff, stacking bricks, progression, building, especially building confidence as it relates to Quinton Johnson. We've seen him at the podium talk about many examples of what Sanjay Lal has been trying to teach him specifically in order to take that next step as a wide receiver. So hopefully it's a good first step, and hopefully that's something that's going to carry into crucial times when we get to the regular season.
Yep. Let's flip the defense. Again, we talked about the secondary seeming connected. I'll let you take the lead.
I'm actually going to start with Deane Leonard again. I was very impressed with what I saw from Deane Leonard in this game. Not only because he was targeted so much, but because he won the day a majority of the time that he was targeted. And there were too many times where we were saying last year when Deane Leonard was forced into the starting lineup that there were quarterbacks that were picking on him, or there were times that he was out of position or couldn't make the tackle. I thought that this is one of the best football displays that he has put on since he's been a part of this team. You have multiple pass breakups that Deane Leonard was able to get on during this game. Obviously, the interception that they ended up holding off the Rams in the end zone, he was in the right position for that one. I just feel this Steve Klingscale philosophy oozing into this cornerback room in general as it relates to getting your guys in the right position, breaking up passes, coming down with the interceptions if capable. And I thought Deane Leonard exuded all of those three things, which especially has just been such a message from Steve Klingscale to make this team more physical, but be aware of what it is that you're responsible for and what the offense is showing you in order to put you in the right position. And that was a great game by Deane Leonard. I loved what I saw. I was very impressed with his tackling, his pass defense, and ultimately that interception that he came down with the end zone. So great job for him. That gives you a little bit more confidence as it relates to the depth of this secondary unit. So hopefully that's something that you definitely see building more going forward.
Yeah. 90.1 coverage grade, according to PFF, for Deane Leonard. 7 targets, 3 receptions for a total of 46 yards. You'll take that.
Take that.
And again, the 1 interception. And again, the resilience. I think you got to have a short memory when you're a DB. And you saw him get kind of beat on that pseudo sort of back shoulder kind of throw that he ended up losing one on.
Had a pass interference call, called on him also. But again, like to your point, Dan, short memory.
He comes back, has a great defensive snap against the receiver in the red zone where he's blocking a fade route, and basically it's his ball or no one's. And then again, right afterwards, gets the interception in the end zone. And also, by the way, heads up, goes down, doesn't try to get out of the end zone, just goes right down. Deane Leonard, you can see the trajectory, right? You're seeing the improvement year over year, and you're seeing, he has all the measurables. And if you can start getting like the tutelage, right? Like that's a good sign for this cornerback room. The other cornerback that I like a ton, we had him on the show last week.
That's why I wanted to let you talk about him.
Tarheeb still, by the way, he has to have some kind of trademark. He's going to have some sponsorship by like Dasani or Fiji, but like Stillwater, come on. Or hell, or Stillwater, even better. Opportunity. Tarheeb, if you hear this, if you see this, you're welcome. He is what you want in a slot corner, man. And again, versatility. He can play outside, inside. He's a great tackler. He's physical. But you're seeing kind of that click and close, the instincts, the pass breakups, the intelligence on the fly. He looked good, man. You saw multiple pass breakups from him. You saw him rush the sideline in an attempt to go get I think it was running back. He caught it out of the backfield. He's aggressive. He's aggressive. He's got instincts. I know everyone's kind of talking about Jazir Taylor, and rightly so, I guess. But it's going to be hard to keep Tarheeb still off the field. And I think I trust Tarheeb more than I trust Jazir Taylor in one-on-one situations. I thought he was good. He was really impressive to me.
I think he's had better moments that you've seen thus far, whether it's throughout training camp practices or you look at this preseason game. Totally. I can understand why people would go ahead and slot Jazir Taylor as the starting nickel just based on his experience with this team, but I wouldn't be so sure. But hey, however you want to take this, Dan, it's just another confidence builder for the depth of this team. Mm-hmm. Regardless if it ends up being Jazir Taylor as the starter, you know that Klingscale and Minter are going to be in a nice rotation with these corners. And the versatility that Tarheeb still brings to the table is not going to be unnoticed and not going to be something that Jesse Minter is going to have sit the bench. You're going to find ways to utilize him in game time situations.
Yeah, and a piece that is so heartwarming and refreshing, and you got to give credit to this coaching staff. And you can go across the board, right? You mentioned Steve Klingscale. Navarro Bowman, take a bow.
Wow.
This linebacking group just looks completely different in the best of ways. And we singled out Deion Henley because I think he looked really good. Shane Lee has looked good. Last week, Troy Dye looked really good. Nick Neiman looked really good. I mean, listen to the names we're talking about. We're not talking about Junior Colson right now. Denzel Perriman was out there doing stuff. Like, they are definitively present and impactful in these games. And that is just a sentence you have not said about linebackers over the past 3 years.
Correct.
I mean, we're talking Shane Lee is now kind of like, is he a roster bubble guy? I don't know. But Deion Henley, specifically, Jake, you saw the pass coverage skills. You're seeing them absolutely wreck shop for opposing blockers, especially running backs when they're trying to block linebackers. The linebacking group as a whole is just completely revamped. And I know that Navarro Bowman has an impact on that. And it's probably, equally Navarro Bowman and the defensive scheme and philosophy with Jesse Minter and the players obviously putting in the work. We were so high on the idea of Junior Colson and Deion Henley. And you're hearing about Junior Colson kind of make plays in limited snaps now that he's back out there at 11-11 during training camp. This linebacking core, man. Whew.
Deion Henley was exuding the athleticism that we have essentially been talking about since he was taken in the third round of last year's draft. And you see that in his coverage that he was able to do in the first couple series of that game. It really gets you excited for when you could see Deion Henley and Junior Colson on this field at the same time. Because what they can do from a physical and mental standpoint for this linebacker group, is to Dan's point, if we're already seeing some of the names that we have named thus far playing like this, imagine when you're going to add a linebacker that is completely familiar with this defense and ultimately knows more about it than any other player that is currently on that defensive roster in Junior Colson. Imagine what it's going to look like there. Dan, this is kind of where you have to give a little bit of the tip of the cap to, once again, Joe Ortiz recycling the bottom of the roster. Shaq Quarterman comes in and forces a fumble. I mean, here we go again. Not only the linebacker group, but it's just a guy who was brought to the roster recently. And we'll talk about another one here in a minute. But this shows the type of impact that this coaching staff in general is having. And you got to tip the cap to Joe Ortiz for still looking for ways to strengthen this roster And I know that the Chargers had just signed another linebacker in the corresponding move with Max Duggan's release, but it's just like, who cares at this point? Who really cares? You could look at the linebacking group right now as possibly the strongest that has performed thus far in the preseason, and the Chargers are still finding ways to add to that group, regardless of how good it's playing. I love that. But then you're also seeing results come on the field. It's not just a name that they're signing. There's a reason why they're making this signing. And you ultimately see the results on the field. Even in a preseason game, I don't care. Do I know 100% if Shaq Quarterman is going to make this final roster at the linebacking group? No. But competitors welcomed has been the message since day one. And this essentially is what we're getting. If we just want to look at the linebacking group specifically, they have lived up to that standard.
Yep. Jake, you talked about this for weeks, that the one position that you were hoping the Chargers would improve was the interior defensive line. In comes Taree Tartt. Jake, yes. Take the podium.
Oh, my God. I don't care what quarter or who Taree Tartt was going up against in this game. Again, he just came to the roster. This is a terrific veteran move for the Chargers to pull off. And I talked to Dan offline about this shortly after this signing ended up taking place, because if you dig into this a little bit, you come to find out that it was late last December when Taree Tartt was released from the Tennessee Titans. It was just before the end of the season. It was just after they had lost to the Houston Texans. And he actually had asked for his release from the Tennessee Titans. On the flip side, the Titans had said, just due to, attitude, misconduct, whatever it was, just wasn't the right fit for the team, whatever general PR, statement that you want to use for why you release somebody. Dan, the first thing that went through my head, not only was this a great signing, but is this another Christian Fulton-like situation? Because we heard what Christian Fulton had to say during his press conference when he was first up there at the podium.
About his previous environment.
Yes, and we've heard this and seen this happen with plenty of other players in NFL history where it just takes a change of environment.
Yeah.
And shortly after Taree Tartt was released from the Tennessee Titans last year, played a short stint to finish out the rest of 2023 with the Houston Texans. The Miami Dolphins signed him in the offseason. And we don't know the context. I think all I heard from their release was that it was just a scheme fit for what they needed at that particular point in time. But the Chargers wasted no time to sign Taree Tartt. And you hear Jim Harbaugh's comments on this because they had him as a player that they targeted early in free agency and wanted to get. And so they were very high on him as it relates to building out this interior defensive line. So I'm very happy to hear that was a priority of theirs, whether you're looking at after the signing of Poona Ford or even after them taking Justin Ebogbe in the NFL draft. I love this signing, Dan. And this is only going to make the interior defensive line competition that much more difficult, because Scott Matlock on top of that had a great game. And Taree Tartt coming in the way that he did shows you exactly what he is all about in terms of being a brick mountain of a man against the run. And if you can get him back to playing in his 2022 form, you got something in then the interior of that defensive line group. So was very happy to see those two displays, that Taree Tartt was able to cause penetration, get a negative play in the backfield on top of just another one being stout against the run and just
that running back
line.
Went nowhere.
Yes. So early days from a guy who just arrived on the roster, veteran or not, but to think about, again, by the time that we get to week one of the season, if this is what you've been able to add in just the offseason alone, and you look at some of these preseason moves that the Chargers have made over these last just few weeks, this is once again a testament to Joe Ortiz never being satisfied with the final 53. The roster construction is never done. And he has lived up to that word without even the Chargers playing a single NFL regular season game. He has done it in a short duration, and it's great to see.
Yeah, you mentioned it today. Joe Ortiz keeps going. Max Duggan and Leon Johnson were both waived today. Linebacker Frank Ginda from the XFL and Jalen Phillips, who you probably recognize that name. He worked out with the Chargers throughout the offseason, back with the Chargers again. Keep moving. So, look, we didn't mention everybody. There's a bunch of guys, but I think this is the exciting part, Jake, and you see the kind of improvements week over week. This was a better week for the offense, largely, in totality, aside from one position that is kind of important. But offense looked good. You saw a lot of good takeaways. Defense, I thought, continued on its solid performance week one with a really good, solid performance in week two as well. Special teams, I will say, it was a little leaky on returns. And I know Ryan Ficken's probably pissed about that. But, I mean, at the end of the day, your kicker is damn good. Your returners are damn good. Your punter's damn good. So, like, you'll take that. And then you got to fix some of the little stuff. But any other kind of honorable mentions, if you will? I thought Thomas Harper, I think, is making a name for himself in terms of maybe being the fourth safety. I don't know how JT Woods is going to be able to keep his roster spot. Any other honorable mentions?
I mean, I kind of mentioned it in the Taree Tartt comments. I thought Scott Matlock had Taree Tartt, excuse me. It's just tongue-tying me saying Taree Tartt. I thought Scott Matlock had a great game. And we were always wondering why Jim Harbaugh singled him out in some of his press conferences and talking about the early days of OTAs and minicamp. And then you're finally starting to see these results. Good indication for a guy who essentially, if we're just talking about, especially if it's Tartt and Poona Ford that are your two interior defensive linemen, I think Matlock and Tito are going to be great rotational pieces, however you want to utilize them for the interior of that defensive line. So you feel a little bit better, not only about your starters, but especially as your depth as well. I love what I'm seeing from Scott Matlock.
Yeah. Overall, though, again, I think you're seeing the Jim Harbaugh effect kind of go in. I think you're seeing the Jesse Minter effect happen. You're definitely seeing the Greg Roman side of the house starting to express itself. Again, we're seeing some running plays and run designs and blocking schemes that, A, we haven't seen, B, have never worked for the Chargers. And you're kind of seeing a little bit of a smash mouth, impose your will at times from a blocking perspective. And all of this is without your quarterback. And again, like, this seems obvious, but there were people that were freaking out about the offense as a whole and just saying, oh, this offense, I'm paraphrasing, like, this offense is so stale. The offense is doing nothing. And Greg Roman sucks. I'm like, guys, one, Greg Roman ain't putting anything out there that is going to be that crazy for other teams to see. Two, Justin Herbert, like, negates so much of this stuff that people are complaining about, to where we spent 10 minutes at the top talking about what is or quarterback two. That's just like an in case emergency break glass scenario. You don't think that the receivers are going to look better with Justin Herbert and the entire offense? So, like, let's pump the brakes. You know, they're trying to get this plane off the runway, to get to the glide state, to get up to 30,000 foot. They're off the tracks now. That's good. But they're not yet at cruising altitude. They will be by week one, so let's let it happen. But overall, I thought this was, again, you lose at the end of the game. I think the defense finally broke at the very, very end on that I think it was third and 1, third and 2 at the end. They gave them a long run. But for the most part, I thought this team looked pretty good. Given the things that we were focusing on that would matter come regular season, there were some optimistic outlooks for sure.
I would agree. Not far from a finished product, but some good things to take away.
Yes, we're working on some fun things here for the week, so stay tuned. But Jake, anything else you want to tell our great friends before we jump on out of here?
17 days, Dan, until NFL kicks off week 1. We have one more preseason game coming up this Saturday for the Chargers to close it out against the Dallas Cowboys. Mark Schlereth had a great quote saying that the preseason games don't matter, but they are important, which is absolutely true. And come the final cuts for this 53-man roster, this is a crucial week because you still have a number of positions that are up for grabs. And seemingly Dan and I talk about this every single year when it talk about the final cut downs and what those are going to look like and how difficult certain players are going to make it to be. Especially on the defensive side of the ball, this one's going to be really tough. Offensively, because of what you've gotten out of your quarterback, it still leaves a lot to be desired at certain wide receiver positions. Mm-hmm. It's going to make it a tough cut. This is going to be a tough week, Dan. We're going to see what happens.
Yeah, next week's going to be a tough week for sure.
Yes.
All right, Jake, that's going to do it. For Jake, you can find him at Jake D. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time on Chargers on the